Hello. Well, we've got an example of a interesting and rare rifle type here. This is a revolving rifle, as you're going to see, right there. And as you saw further, this thing has some wear and tear on it. This was absolutely used and probably for a long time. Revolving rifles are really unique because they're kind of a failed experiment in terms of the history of firearms, but they were a thing, and for a decent enough time to count, they're also just really cool, I think. This one, as you might be able to tell by now, is Mexican, Ejército Mexicano, Mexican Army. But it ended up in the Wild West, which was why it was part of the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum collection. And that's how these are mostly remembered, as kind of a frontier weapon, so you'll see them in old westerns, that kind of thing. And they were used for a reason, despite all of the reasons that this is ultimately a failed experiment. During its heyday in the early 1800s, it was basically the only repeating rifle you were going to be able to use. Being able to beat your opponent's rate of fire by a wide margin and reload speed is really attractive. Even if the gun was not as powerful as its competitors, prone to the occasional malfunction where all the ammunition would go off at once, and most importantly, likely to burn your arm. That's because with a revolving rifle, your left arm, the supporting arm, is perilously close to the source of the explosion. The positives and negatives all come together in a vignette from the Civil War, when the Ohio 21st, who were pretty unique because they were armed exclusively with revolving rifles, these were Colts, used those to hold off a much larger Confederate force. Think of a typical Civil War musket, and you'll see why, right? So the rate of fire was a huge advantage, but it's not just that. When it came to reloading, you could reload your entire chamber quicker than your opponent could just reload one shot. Here's the type of rifle that they had been using, and they got good at it. Like, they figured out a hold for the rifle so that they wouldn't burn their arm. They could lay down flat on the ground behind a small piece of cover and reload, which the enemy could not do. They were eventually overwhelmed, but the reason for that might surprise you. They just ran out of ammunition. The unique nature of the weapon at that point ended up hurting them because they couldn't use any of the conventional rounds that they would have had available otherwise. They were just littered all over the place. That was at the Battle of Chickamauga in Tennessee, by the way. That Civil War time frame is kind of a useful bookend. It's really the end of the useful era for this kind of thing. Not that they couldn't still be used, they were, but as far as them being, advanced technology. Why were they still used in the later 1800s when better options were available? Well, they still existed. If it's all you could get your hands on, you'd be happy to use it. Still a functioning firearm. Here's the folding rear ladder sight. I always thought those looked really cool when you'd see them in old westerns. This is an 8mm firearm, by the way. Has a case-hardened trigger and hammer. I've talked about that process in past videos, and I'm not the ideal person to explain it anyway. So, it's just a really cool rifle. I love the hybrid type. I love the look. I'm sure this particular specimen would have some really interesting stories to tell. And I'm just going to let you get one last view of it. Thanks.